The Museum of Contemporary Art Denver and the Denver Center for the Performing Arts present Mixed Taste, tag team lectures on unrelated topics. And now, introducing tonight's unlikely pairing, Jackie Robinson and La Belle Epoque. Please welcome tonight's host, Charlie Miller.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all here, and those who are watching us online, welcome. My name is Charlie Miller. I'm the Executive Director of Off Center at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. I'm thrilled to be co-hosting and co-curating this summer's Mixed Taste along with my friends Sarah Bai and Brendan Zola, and we're happy to have you here tonight. This is the 18th year of Mixed Taste, which is produced as a partnership between the DCPA and MCA Denver, and we're really excited to be back here at the Holiday Theater. So welcome, thank you for being here. I hope you have a drink. We're excited to have alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks in the theater tonight, and if you're watching from home, we hope you have a tasty beverage as well. So in order to allow our audience here in person and those online to participate in Mixed Taste at the same time, we have a second screen experience that we want to just run through here and show you how it works. So scan the QR code that you see up on the screen here. If you don't know how to scan a QR code, open your camera, hold it, and click on the little pop-up that comes there. If the QR code isn't working, you can also go to slido.com and enter the code word Mixed Taste, one word. Once you're in there, you'll see a web page with 3 tabs at the top of your screen where you can participate in the ideas chat. You can take polls and submit questions for the Q&A at the end of the show. So let's do a quick poll here to try it out. Everyone ready? You are invited to dinner with artists from La Belle Epoque. Which Henri are you excited to sit next to? Or do you sit next to? Do you choose Henri Matisse, Henri Rousseau, Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, or who cares because you are too Henri? Get it? All right, so cast your votes. We'll see. Oh, okay, it's a tie between a couple Henris here. Very good. Matisse in the lead. All right, Toulouse-Lautrec, 37%. So you get how it works. This is a poll. We'll play a halftime game where you'll do some more polling. Excellent. So if you're walking in here and don't know what is going on, or if you're an old fan of Mixed Taste, here's what we're doing tonight. Mixed Taste is a mashup series where we bring together 2 experts who each present on different topics, and then we have a live question and answer on both topics at the same time. The rules are very simple. The first speaker talks for 20 minutes. The second speaker will then speak on a completely unrelated topic for 20 minutes. During the first part of the program, no connections are allowed between the 2 topics, but during the Q&A, anything is possible. Between the talks, we'll take a little halftime break, we'll play a little game, and at the end of the night, we have an amazing local poet here who will create an original poem and perform it for us, inspired by what we learned here tonight. So let's get started and introduce our first speaker who will be teaching us about La Belle Epoque. Giulia Bernardini is an instructor of humanities and art history at CU Boulder and the founder of Wonder Feast, a boutique art travel company. Multicultural and multilingual, her passion for the art, culture, and literature that she teaches, as well as for travel and gastronomy, comes from an early desire to understand the cultures she encountered growing up in Western Europe. She is a regular guest lecturer in the Boulder, Denver area on the art of the Italian Renaissance and Baroque, and on the Parisian Belle Epoque. In the summertime, she returns to France and Italy to share her passion for the 2 countries' most celebrated cities with inquisitive art, food, and culture-loving Wonder Feast seminar participants. Please welcome Giulia Bernardini.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you very, very much, Charlie. All right, so La Belle Epoque, the beautiful era. It refers to 43 years of French, especially Parisian history. From 1871, the year of France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War and birth of the Third Republic, to 1914, the beginning of World War I. It's the time of the 1889 World Fair, featuring Gustave Eiffel's magnificently wondrous or hideous, depending on which side you were on, Iron Tower. It's the time of this postcard from 1900, replete with parasols and ladies in My Fair Lady-like chapeaus thronging the chic Tsar Alexander III Bridge. It's the time of isms, Impressionism, like this 1890s painting of Boulevard Montmartre by Camille Pissarro, of symbolism, of post-impressionism, of fauvism, of orphism and futurism and cubism, and many more. But scratch under the surface of this seemingly charming imagery and you realize it's a time of great turbulence. Tonight, I want to discuss this complicated, fascinating time period by focusing on depictions of Belle Epoque nightlife, primarily in the 1890s and then again in 1913, with a few stops in between. But first, some context. The dominant trend shaping this period, and not only in France, but throughout Western Europe and the United States, is industrialization. People are leaving the countryside in droves for jobs in increasingly populous cities that become sites of class and gender interaction and tension. In 1872, the population of Paris is 1.8 million, and just 30 years later, let's see, where's 1872? Right there, 1.8 million, and then just 30 years later, in 1911, it's 2.8 million. More than today's. In response, the city of Paris is physically changing before residents' eyes and under their feet as a huge urbanization project results in the old maze of medieval streets with their mishmash of architectural styles being replaced by a network of grand boulevards and stately squares, the roads and nodes that one Belle Epoque art historian has referred to, flanked by imposing, homogeneous middle-class apartment buildings. As rents go up and become affordable only to the wealthy, like the fashionable crowd that you can see outside the American Church of, sorry about that, of La Sainte Trinité right here in Monsieur Béraud's picture. Poorer residents are forced out to the city's perimeter and suburbs. The crowded, busy city thus strikes many as not just bustling, but frenetic. As we see here in Monet's Boulevard des Capucines, two versions of it in 1873, where you see the boulevard is just thronged with these almost like little amoebas kind of buzzing around, and the very, very visible black that's worn both by men and women during the daytime. That was the color of the day costume, if you will. In fact, by the 1880s, many Impressionists, including Monsieur Monet, have left the city for the cheaper and quieter countryside. Visiting Paris in the same decade, Sigmund Freud from Vienna remarks, "The city and its inhabitants strike me as uncanny. The people seem to be of a different species from ourselves. I feel they're possessed of 1,000 demons." Now, granted, he was Austrian and a little uptight, but anyway. Politically, the situation is volatile. In the early 1870s, the newly minted Third Republic's government is seen by many to be just as oppressive as the previous regime of Emperor Napoleon III, nephew of the little guy with the hand in the, Okay. After all, the Third Republic's government had capitulated to the Prussians against the French people's wishes. And here you see the Tower of Sedan with Otto von Bismarck's Pickelhaube, his very distinctive helmet that he always wore. The Republican government had capitulated to the Russians against the French people's wishes, and it had violently suppressed the Paris Commune, a short-lived revolutionary government established by working-class Parisians and their allies in reaction to the government's surrender to Prussia, seen as an act of betrayal. Over the following decades, the turmoil continues. By the late 80s and into the 90s, colonialism, a bungled war with China, political favoritism and corruption, multiple scandals, and a flagging economy lead to a rise of nationalism. Meanwhile, all this time, royalists of various stripes are jockeying unsuccessfully to restore a king to the throne. Socialists and communists clamor for justice for the working class. Remember, there were no laws at this time. At one point, they passed one law saying, okay, maybe we shouldn't really let any kids under 11 years old work past 9 o'clock at night. I mean, we're talking really dire situations here. And then in the early 1890s, anarchism is on the rise, right? These very disgruntled and extreme working class, let's say, agitators clamoring for justice feel that the only solution is anarchism, and some of them on the fringes commit acts of terror known as propaganda by the deed, culminating in the assassination of the president in 1894. All of this is exacerbated by the infamous decade-long Dreyfus affair, which sees French Jewish Army Captain Alfred Dreyfus wrongly convicted of treason, while the highest military and political command of the country cover up the mistakes and create false evidence in a virulent anti-Semitic nationalist smear campaign. France feels irreparably damaged, splintered, and disillusioned. Sound vaguely familiar? Here is Marianne. Marianne is the allegorical representation of France. She's always a woman wearing the tricolore as a sash with the Phrygian cap on her head. And what she's doing is she's sending these naughty little schoolboys out the door because she's had enough. And of course, each and every one of them is a caricature of a contemporary politician. And they're all up in arms and fighting with each other and beating each other to a pulp over the Dreyfus affair. Despite, or perhaps because of all this, hedonism in fin de siècle, turn of the century Paris, carries on unabated. The birthplace of the short-lived Paris Commune, the working-class hilltop village of Montmartre, becomes a creative hub during the first half of the Parisian Belle Epoque. Here, attracted by cheap rent, wine, and night spots, artists, poets, and musicians gather and work to give form to these rapidly changing modern times. In Pierre-Auguste Renoir's Moulin de la Galette, we see a working-class guinguette, or drinking and dance hall, populated by Montmartrois working-class men and women and the occasional bourgeois gentleman. And you can recognize the working class, members of the working class with their chapeau melon, the sort of, half melon-shaped hats. So believe it or not, actually, headwear was a social signifier of class divisions. And so you see the working class melon here, or the straw boater, and then you have the occasional bourgeois gentleman in the black silk top hat. Bourgeois ladies were not supposed to go to these establishments of ill repute. It was rather convenient for the bourgeois gentlemen. But the mood in the picture is light and joyful. The humiliation of defeat in the Franco-Prussian War and the horror of the Commune's demise are in the past. The entrance fee is cheap. The drink flows easily. Romance is in the air. Keep in mind, nevertheless, that to a 19th century audience, there would have been, a sort of suspicion visited upon the young women in the picture, because often enough working class women being paid less than miserable wages supplemented their incomes at times with sex work. In 1889, another venue opens in the area, this time specifically to attract middle-class and high bourgeois denizens of Parisian nightlife. Le Moulin Rouge, unlike the other windmills on the butte or hill, is an Epcot-like non-functioning simulacrum, and its entry fee of 3 francs versus the 50 cents of most other places on the hill ensures that only the wealthy will cross its threshold. Indeed, an account of the opening night confirms as much. Quote, last night, the whole of Paris was at the Moulin Rouge to celebrate the opening, and the show was not only on the stage, but also in the audience. On view were their Highnesses Prince Stanislas de Poniatowski, the Prince Trubetskoy, the Comte de la Rochefoucauld, Monsieur together with the flower of literature and the arts, having the time of their lives without their wife. The management hires artists to create posters advertising the new venue throughout the city. Unlike Rödel's somewhat stiff and formal poster, or even Chéret's more dynamic, whoopsie, sorry about the label there, more dynamic and engaging imagery, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, and hey, how about that, right? You all wanted to hang out with him at dinner. Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec's flat areas of color, strange juxtapositions of abstracted forms, and pronounced outlines here, and especially noticeable here, underscore the funhouse-like absinthe-fueled atmosphere of what the owners of the Moulin Rouge provocatively proclaimed was, quote, the first palace of woman. Toulouse-Lautrec underlines this literally, as I just pointed out, with that line there, in his poster because he knows that while Valentin le Désossé, Valentin the boneless one because of his very sinuous and seemingly almost, jointless way of moving his body, despite the fact that Valentin le Désossé was certainly a draw, the real reason why bourgeois customers made the steep climb up the butte and paid the equally steep entrance fee is to catch a glimpse of the flesh displayed by dancers like La Goulue and Jane Avril during the Chahut, better known as the Can-Can. Toulouse-Lautrec's paintings and drawings of the Moulin Rouge and the many other Montmartre nightclubs that he frequents and actually lives in, he lived in brothels in the Montmartre neighborhood, feature similar characteristics, disorienting perspectives inspired by the Japanese Edo period woodblock prints that he was introduced to by his friend and idol Edgar Degas, strange, slightly sickening color choices and juxtapositions, and scratchy, insistent lines. And this is actually a self-portrait of Toulouse-Lautrec with his cousin in the background. That's La Goulue, who we just saw in the previous poster. Throughout the 90s, until his early death in 1901, Toulouse-Lautrec goes on to create numerous posters advertising dance halls, dancers, oopsie. Oh, sorry, I wanted to just show you, for example, the comparison with, what am I doing here? There we go. The comparison with Renoir's picture of 1876, and you can see that the mood is altogether very, very different. Perhaps in Toulouse-Lautrec's work, we might see the nightmarish effects of his alcoholism and depression. It's also tempting to read in them the disorienting effects of the anarchist attacks rocking the country, as well as the heaviness of continued economic depression and increasingly marked class and social tensions. Throughout the 90s, until his early death in 1901, Toulouse-Lautrec goes on to create numerous posters advertising dance halls and dancers. Jane Avril's poster here on the left was actually commissioned of him by her for her new dance hall, as well as cabarets. This is Aristide Bruant at the Ambassadeur, as well as literary works and photographers' studios. His posters quickly become recognizable for the strange perspectival choices, the figure's mask-like, often blank expressions, and the scratchy, sinuous, dark lines that exaggerate and satirize the subject matter, creating a new visual language for a new Paris. The posters quickly build up Toulouse-Lautrec's reputation at the same time as those of the women that they so prominently feature, many of them his friends, La Goulue, Jane Avril, who we see here, and the diseuse Yvette Gilbert with her trademark black gloves that are enough to stand in for her. The subject matter of the posters is often dangerous, deliberately provocative, and in its pronounced sexuality and subversive. Similarly, the poster medium is subversive as it's made for the streets. Félix Fénéon, and I apologize, I don't have the name of the artist nor the title of this particular work that I found on the internet, bad Giulia. Félix Fénéon, an anarchist art critic, lambasts traditional art shows and sings the praises of posters when he writes, "It's not for me. I won't make a fool of myself in exhibitions and get a stiff neck from staring at dirty underwear in gold frames." Instead of that idiocy, let's imagine you're in the street, you piss against a wall, you stroll with your pal, you're on your way to the job or home, and at the same time, without thinking about it, you glance up at the posters. It's an open-air exhibition all year long and all along the street, and that's real art, by God, and it cries out. It's part of life itself. It's art that doesn't fool around, and real guys can get it. He goes on to refer to the poster medium as dynamite, a powerful definition in the face of the anarchist acts that are roiling the country. And although Toulouse-Lautrec was not openly an anarchist, he had ties to anarchist figures. In fact, Jane Avril's nickname, La Mélinite, refers to a powerful form of explosive. A young Spanish artist who comes to Paris in 1900 for the World Fair is similarly fascinated by Montmartre nightlife and gravitates with his fellow artist friends to its watering holes. Pablo Picasso's version of the Moulin de la Galette is heavily indebted to the work of Toulouse-Lautrec, where the dark demi-monde, or half-world, is described, again, in lurid colors and deliberately distorted shapes. It bears few to no traces of the carefree camaraderie celebrated in Renoir's Impressionist work. Then, in 1907, Picasso finishes work on this picture, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, a painting featuring 5 strange and threatening nude prostitutes in a brothel, their faces inspired by the African masks Picasso was seeing in shops and museums as a result of colonial contact and plunder. The jagged, sharp angles and lines inspire Georges Braque, a contemporary and eventual collaborator of Picasso's, to carry forward the experimentation started by Picasso in the painting. Forms fractured into abstract planes are rearranged on the canvas surface, as we see in Braque's Portuguese, a development that becomes known as Cubism. And what we're looking at here is a musician standing in front of a cafe window. I know, right? Their work responds to recent developments in science and mathematics, the rejection of Euclidean geometry that says 2 parallel lines in space will never meet, the very underpinning of linear perspective that basically governs art making in Europe from the Renaissance to, well, Toulouse-Lautrec. In place of an emphasis on perception, instead, they favor conception, representing what the artist experiences rather than what he sees. So, in Picasso's Glass and Bottle of Suze, we see forms clashing and overlapping against a background of newsprint featuring accounts of the deadly battles of the contemporary Crimean War and of clashes between anarchists, communists, socialists, and government forces at workers' demonstrations and strikes. All this is taking place in an abstracted setting of a loud, alcohol-fused cafe, working-class cafe, recognizable in the oval-shaped table, as well as in the cheap wallpaper and the glass and bottle of Suze that would be consumed there. Moving in the same circle as Picasso, Braque, their friend the poet Guillaume Apollinaire, and others, are Robert and Sonia Delaunay, both inspired by Cubism to create art that would reflect the highly kinetic quality of modern life in early 20th century Paris. Electricity, automobiles, radio, X-rays, telegraph, airplanes, moving image, the theory of relativity, Riemann's explanations of the fourth dimension, and the developments in atomic physics invite artists to question the validity of representing static reality. So the Eiffel Tower and the curtained window, with the billowing curtains flapping in the sunlight, merge to create forms and shards of color, or their son Charles' quilt quickly becomes a study in fractured forms and the lines that link them and that suggest movement. When Italian futurist artist Gino Severini applies these ideas to a representation of dancers doing the waltz at the wildly popular Bal Tabarin, Sonia Delaunay quickly carries on the conversation. The center of Paris's nightlife has by now moved down the hill of Montmartre to the other side of the River Seine in the cheap and shabby neighborhood of Montparnasse. Here, at the Sidi Balbullier, a dance hall frequented by men and women of ill repute, which ones weren't, Sonia, Robert, and their friends gather to dance the scandalous, wildly popular New Tango. In her large horizontal canvas, we see those pinwheel-like color swaths melting together, separating, and tumbling as the dancing couples spin through the nightclub, thick with atmosphere pierced by bright lights. The spatial and temporal entities that collapse and collide into a simultaneous here and now lead Sonia in 1913 to take art off the canvas and place it on her body. Thus, she creates her simultaneous dress. As she put it, the rhythms of the music made us make those colors dance too. Everyday clothing, as well as those for Sundays, was really monotonous and dull. We wanted to put an end to this general state of mourning. It was up to us. I wore my first simultaneous dress. With its quilted, asymmetrical, juxtaposed colors, fabrics, and shapes, sinuously swirling down her body from shoulder to breast to hips, it allowed her to wear the movements that she and her husband Robert described with their dance steps. And the generous slit she defiantly cut all the way up the side endowed her with more freedom of movement than the hobble skirt style of the day normally allowed. The Belle Epoque was a time of enormous transformation and upheaval. Over the course of those 4 decades, Paris grew into a sprawling urban center populated by a growing working class and bourgeoisie, many of them with expendable income and leisure time, as we see here in Kustodiev 1913 picture. Positing themselves as society's cultural pioneers, artists like Renoir, Toulouse-Lautrec, Picasso, and Sonia Delaunay represented the time period's avant-garde. Their self-imposed task to translate this new state of modernity into their chosen media in fresh, provocative new ways. Among their many subjects, their artworks featuring and inspired by Parisian nightclubs, dance halls, and cafes provide especially intriguing clues into the society that arose to form the basis of the modern world that we live in today. The pictures were often far from rosy, but they're certainly unforgettable. And it comes as no surprise to learn that in the aftermath of the horrors of the so-called war to end all wars, i.e. World War I, the French decided to nostalgically baptize the pre-war era La Belle Epoque. Indeed, we might think of the phrase as French for the good old days. Merci.
Thank you, Giulia. And now,
It's halftime.
it's halftime. Feel free to get up, get a quick drink if you need one. We're gonna play a little game between our 2 talks. So, to join us for tonight's game, I'm excited to welcome to the stage tonight's poet, Mahogany. Come on up, Mahogany. Welcome. Nice to have you back at Mixed Taste. Is your mic on? Your mic's on. Great. So tonight's game is a mashup game of our 2 topics that we like to call Take Me Out to La Belle Epoque. All right? So we invite you to play on your second screen. So the QR code is here. Sorry, Dele, I went out of order. You can get your screens ready because we're going to do some trivia. So it's a trivia game. We're going to have 5 questions. Mahogany's going to play, and you're going to play, and we'll see how it goes. This is tricky, I think. It was tricky for me, at least. Okay, is everyone ready to begin our game? So here's the first question. Who did the Brooklyn Dodgers defeat in the first World Series? Was it the Baltimore Orioles, the New York Yankees? I better hide my answers from Mahogany here. The Chicago White Sox, or the Minnesota Twins? And Mahogany, you can look and see what the audience is saying, or you can just guess on your own. It's up to you.
I'm going to go with my audience friends and say New York Yankees.
New York Yankees, 52%?
Yes.
That is correct. The 1955 World Series matched the Brooklyn Dodgers against the New York Yankees, and the Dodgers won the series in 7 games to capture their first championship.
Awesome.
Well done, audience. Okay, you ready for number 2? If you didn't notice, we're alternating between baseball and art history here. So, which artist, part of the neo-impressionist style, created the technique known as pointillism? Here comes my terrible French pronunciation. Was it Paul Gauguin, Georges Seurat, Eugène Delacroix, or Jean Ingres?
Have to go with my audience friends and say George Seurat.
All right, that is correct.
Yeah.
Well done. And for those musical theater fans out there, you know a wonderful Sondheim classic, Sunday in the Park with George. Okay, next question. What legendary broadcaster called Dodger games from 1950 to 2016? Was it Red Barber, Vin Scully, Charlie Steiner, or Bob Euchre?
They're making it easy, Charlie. Vin Scully.
Vin Scully, that is correct. And I don't know if you saw the sad news that Vin Scully passed away yesterday.
Oh, wow.
We actually created this before that news, but he had an amazing 67-year career calling games for the Dodgers, which was the longest tenure of any broadcaster with a single team in professional sports history.
That's awesome.
Not arts history. Okay, 2 more questions to go. You're doing great, audience, you're doing great. Which female pitcher once struck out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig? Was it Jackie Mitchell, Kelsey Whitmore, Mamie Johnson, or Constance Morgan?
Mamie Johnson.
Gonna go with the audience? Audience seems confident on this one.
Yeah.
That's incorrect. You're all incorrect. It was Jackie Mitchell, who was, get this, a 17-year-old female pitcher for the AA Chattanooga Lookouts.
Oh, wow.
She played she played the Yankees in an exhibition game and struck out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig in succession. How awesome is that? That's some good trivia right there.
Yes, it is.
Okay, last question. Who is the most famous American-born Impressionist artist? Is it Berthe Morisot, Alfred Sisley, Mary Cassatt, or Eduard Monet? The audience seems fairly confident here.
I'm familiar with Mary Cassatt, so I'm going to go with Mary Cassatt.
Mary Cassatt.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Yay.
Well done. She was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1945 and arrived in Paris in 1866.
Awesome.
Mahogany, well done. Audience, well done. 4 out of 5. Very respectable. Congratulations. That's a passing score. And I look forward to your poem at the end of the night.
Excited.
All right. And now,
on with the show.
That's more like it. All right, everyone. I would like to introduce our next guest, who will be teaching us about Jackie Robinson. Raymond Doswell joined the staff of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri, in 1995 as its first curator. The museum has grown into an important national attraction, welcoming over 60,000 visitors annually. He earned a doctorate in educational leadership from Kansas State University through work in partnership with the museum to develop educational websites and programs. Doswell travels extensively as a public speaker on topics of baseball and African American history. Now, as museum vice president, he manages exhibitions, archives, and educational programs. Please welcome Ray Doswell.
All right. Bonjour, baseball fans. That is the only French I know, so that's all you get. Thank you. And I'm appreciative of my very first balloon podium. This is wonderful. Okay. I wore purple for you Broad Street Bomber fans. So it's a road game for me, but we're glad to be here tonight to talk to you about Jackie Robinson. So today and this year, 2022, marks the 75th anniversary of Robinson's first appearance with the Brooklyn Dodgers. This moment broke a long-standing color barrier in Major League Baseball. Now, Jack Roosevelt Robinson was born in Cairo, Georgia, in January of 1919. His family escaped sharecropping to migrate across country to Pasadena, California. When he was an infant, he rose above poverty to become an outstanding multi-sport athlete, Army veteran, baseball pioneer, business leader, and icon for civil rights. His significance goes beyond the fact that he was the first African American in the modern era to play on an integrated professional baseball team. His abilities and accomplishments were outstanding, ranking him among the greatest baseball players of all time. He was named an All-Star 6 times and was inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962, the first African American to receive the honor. However, Mr. Robinson's career is often defined by a signature play, stealing home plate. One specific instance stands out among the rest. It was a career capstone moment for one of the game's greatest practitioners. It happened on a humid Wednesday, September 28, 1955, at a rain-swept Yankee Stadium, Bronx, New York. 63,800 plus baseball fans on site and thousands more by radio and television settled in to witness the first game of the World Series championship between the New York Yankees and the Brooklyn Dodgers. They silently took a moment to reflect on the health of an ailing President Eisenhower, who fell ill just 2 days before. And for a few minutes, baseball fans tried to put aside the national recovery effort from Hurricane Diane, global issues in Southeast Asia, and national racial tensions highlighted by the murder of a Black Chicago teenager named Emmett Till earlier that summer in Mississippi. The teams enjoyed the clearing skies and intense competition of the game, especially the Yankees. They built a 6-3 lead with multiple home runs. By the top of the 8th inning, however, overcast skies returned, forcing lights on at the stadium and ushering a comeback for the Dodgers. With one out and a man on first, the venerable Jackie Robinson, after 9 grueling baseball seasons, comes to the plate batting 7th in the order. The Dodgers had been to the championship 5 previous times against the Yankees, yet lost each time. This is the year, fans desperately hoped, would be the one that would put them on top. That hope was well-founded as they had a very good team. It was a 90-plus win season for the Dodgers, but a roller coaster year for Robinson. He continued to be admired and scorned for his outspokenness about baseball and social issues. He had a tense relationship with his 5th team manager, Walter Alston. His previous season was subpar by his standards and tumultuous. He had to battle for a starting position at third base in 1955, with stretches of successful hitting as well as poor play, magnified by chronic knee and ankle ailments. But through all the highs and lows, both admirers and critics acknowledged his competitiveness. It fueled his successful stretches on the field and, as a cheerleader for the Dodgers, from the Dodgers bench, fired up his teammates. So the 36-year-old lion of baseball and black manhood found himself ready to pounce the competition after reaching base safely, then advancing to third. He was awaiting a pinch hitter to appear with 2 outs. He had been on the championship stage before, yet in all previous instances, the opportunity to conduct his signature dance of distraction from third base, moving around, threatening to run, to fluster the opposing pitchers and catchers, may not have presented itself so well as today, facing pitcher Whitey Ford and catcher Yogi Berra. Robinson remembered, our fans were ready to shrug their shoulders and say, wait till next year. I was on third base and I knew I might not be playing next year. I suddenly decided to shake things up. It was not the best baseball strategy. I really didn't care whether I made it or not. I was just tired of waiting. So he did his dance. And then he dashed to home plate, sliding just under the tag of Yogi Berra. A straight steal of home base in the World Series. Amazing feat. So Jackie Robinson's uncanny ability to steal home plate remains underappreciated in history. To be sure, his exploits as a base runner are revered and romanticized in the volumes of literature about him. Robinson was also far from being the all-time quote-unquote record holder in the category. Steals of home actually are not an official statistic in baseball. They are just simply included with the player's normal stolen base totals. However, the significance of Robinson's career accomplishment lie in the understanding the context in which he repeatedly performed one of the most fearless and aggressive competitive acts possible within the rules of baseball. Stealing home plate is the boldest and bravest offensive play you can make to score points in baseball. Robinson did it as good as anyone in history. It's been argued that African American athletes of Robinson's era used their bodies to channel cultural dissent and protest through their performance. In describing players of the old Negro Leagues, the late historian Pella McDaniel surmised that tied to America's tradition of racial segregation was the constant need of black men to validate themselves publicly in an effort to claim their citizenship, manhood, and masculinity. Within the context of the game of baseball, its rituals and evolving traditions, the complex nature of race in America was revealed in terms closely connected to the athletic performances of some of the game's greatest players. In demonstrating their athletic abilities publicly in an attempt to erase the lie perpetuated against them, black men pushed back against white supremacy. In drawing attention to their creativity and athletic ability, black athletes defined themselves as unique expressions of dissent. Unique expressions of dissent. And like those predecessors, Robinson exhibited dissent in his overall play, most demonstrably through his steals of home plate. Each steal left an indelible mark in the minds of opposing players and fans. Each attempt was the manifestation of his aggressive playing style and personality, honed by his unique personal and athletic experiences as a black man in segregated America. Even as his skills were diminishing with age, as the case in the 1955 World Series, the stolen base remained a potent tactic to deploy in achieving victory and establishing self-identity. Okay, this is the only math I got in the entire presentation. So you math fans, here you go. We're going to look further at Robinson's athletic feats by briefly examining some statistics and examples of his performance. Robinson's career statistical line for 10 seasons includes 197 regular season stolen bases. He had 5 seasons with 20-plus stolen bases, including leading the National League in steals in 1947 and 1949. Of those 197 steals, RetroSheet.com, which is an amazing baseball website, has noted 19 successful regular steals of home out of 31 attempts, 31 total attempts, with the one successful postseason attempt that I talked about earlier, okay? They have to go through old box scores just to figure out if he stole home because, again, it's not a separate statistical record, right? And these are all the examples of when he was successful in black and in red, the times that he got thrown out, okay? So according to another baseball site, the baseballalmanac.com, the 19 regular season attempts ranks him 10th in the all-time record list, well behind the leader, Ty Cobb, who is credited with 54 in his career, including 8 in the 1912 season. Still, Robinson is among only 20 players all time with 15 or more career steals of home, all right? So if we examine this list more closely, we see something more interesting. I reorganized the list chronologically to when the players played. And a gap of about a decade appears between Robinson and his contemporaries to other great home plate stealers. In fact, there's really only one player on the list that might be considered a Robinson contemporary. His name is Ben Chapman, who later became infamous as manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. So yes, that Ben Chapman, who was a Southern-born former star center fielder for the New York Yankees, became infamous as manager for the Phillies as he mercilessly heckled and disrespected Robinson in 1947 and was forced to apologize soon after. So if you saw the scene with actor Alan Tudyk in the film 42, where he is calling him every name but a child of God, that was Ben Chapman, who was forced to apologize for his actions. And they took this picture a few days later, and they did not shake hands, they held a bat. So, well, you interpret that as you will. So now did the media and fans suggest that Robinson was the next Ben Chapman? Was he being compared to speedster Frankie Frisch? or George Sisley, who's seen in this photo, is a coach for the Dodgers and helps Robinson with fielding, base running, and sliding techniques? No. Robinson is frequently compared to his fellow Georgia native Ty Cobb. So Robinson's stellar play causes us to take notice on two levels. First, he is seen as reviving an aggressive and exciting style of play not seen since arguably the greatest baseball player of the previous generation, Ty Cobb, which amounts to roughly 30 years. Secondly, he is a black man making these bold and aggressive performance statements. He never backed down from the challenge of playing his game in the major leagues and endured the withering racial pressure placed upon him by his detractors. In all instances, his performance, especially when stealing home, were considered exciting, sensational, and provocative. Now, it's important to know, however, that the Brooklyn Dodger fans had seen prolific base stealing from another player named Harold Pete Reeser, a Dodger veteran outfielder whose playing time was interrupted by military service in 1942. Reeser returned brilliantly in 1946 to lead the league with 34 stolen bases, 7 of which were steals of home. Reeser stole home on opening day in 1946 and achieved 5 successful attempts by mid-July, helping to lead the Dodgers to a 96-win season. However, they finished second in the division to the St. Louis Cardinals by 2 games. Still, with Reeser's comeback and the prospect of Robinson just about ready to make the move to Brooklyn from his minor league baseball assignment, which was with the Montreal Royals, there's a little more French, of the international leagues, Dodgers general manager Branch Rickey must have blown smoke rings of joy on his cigars as he anticipated the 47th season. Even with the trepidations of the great experiment of integration looming, Reeser and Robinson could prove to be a dynamic dual threat. Alas, this never fully materialized. Reeser ultimately passes the torch to Robinson as Reeser's playing time became more diminished due to a broken body, much of which he broke with reckless abandon. When Reeser crashed into an outfield wall in June of 1947 versus the Pirates and suffered a concussion, his 3rd such wall crash of his career, he missed significant time and was never the same player. Robinson had to step up his play even more now, noting in his autobiography that he was under even greater pressure than his Montreal days. He was still trying to adjust to his unique place on the Dodgers team. Also weighing on him was the admonition of Branch Rickey to manage his aggressiveness in fighting back against beanballs and spikes and jeers in order to make his integration into baseball flow more smoothly. He battled the pressures through performance, particularly the stolen base. He remembered that in Montreal, he earned a reputation for stealing bases, and that pressure eased when he began stealing again. He worked bunts into hits, he made bold steals, and put himself in position to do the dance off third base. 2 weeks after Reeser's injury, he made his first major league home steal attempt during a regular season game. We go back to Tuesday evening, June 24th, 1947. While Reeser was on his way to visit a neurologist at Johns Hopkins Hospital, the Dodgers attempt to throttle the Pittsburgh Pirates in the opener of a 2-game series. Parked on third base with 2 outs in the top of the 5th inning, a man also on first, the score was 2-2. Robinson did his unique dance against 39-year-old left-hander Fritz Ostermuller. Now, Fritz had already had a run-in with the Dodgers earlier that season. He hit Robinson with a pitch during their first meeting, which cleared the benches for a team fight and partially galvanized a more sympathetic Dodgers team behind Robinson. Now, going back to the June game, the Illinois pitching native might have been distracted by Robinson's dance, yet he chose to deliver the ball 3 to batter Dixie Walker from the windup, a particularly deliberate windup. And this was almost easy pickings for the Negro Flash, as the New York Times' Roscoe McGowan called him. Robinson would say in his biography that Ostermuller was careless and that he paid me the insult of winding up, ignoring my movements as antics. The late pitch received by catcher Dixie Howell forced a late tag attempt and a safe call by home plate umpire Bill Stewart. It was a 2-out straight steal of home by a rookie, sending 35,000 Pittsburgh fans into frenzy and distress. Robinson scored the game-winning run on the play. Now, Branch Rickey is credited to have said, "Wait, you haven't seen Robinson in action yet." Not really. He is still in his shell. When he comes out for good, he will be compared to Ty Cobb. Now, great historian Jonathan Ike eloquently recreates this home steal in his book Opening Day, which chronicles Robinson's inaugural season with the Dodgers. Ike describes Robinson's base stealing this way. It spoke of both the fearlessness with which he carried himself and the fear he inspired. Robinson put himself forth as both a team player and an individual, an insider and an outsider, a man playing by the rules yet boldly bending them to his will. While Branch Rickey had curbed Robinson's natural aggressiveness with the gag order, he couldn't curb Robinson's killer instinct on the field. And nothing symbolized that instinct better than his brazen thefts. The steal of home was his special weapon, the switchblade in his pocket. Ike writes beautifully, more beautifully than I do. But I kind of disagree with this last statement. Because to pull a switchblade in a fight suggests deliberate stealth and deception. Throughout his athletic career, especially in baseball, there was nothing deceptive or stealth about Robinson. The killer instinct in the arena was always present and out front. Going back to his earliest days, Robinson was a blunt instrument of athleticism. Always performing, always pushing back against the supremacist ideology that he did not belong on the playing field. Any opponent team scout or manager worth his salt should have seen it coming if they were paying attention to his rise from the minor leagues and his early play as a rookie that season. So I want to conclude by Robinson recalling in his autobiography the encouragement General Manager Branch Rickey gave him during spring training games in 1947. I want you to be a whirling demon. I want you to concentrate, to hit the ball, to get on base by any means necessary. I want you to run wild and steal the pants off of them, to be the most conspicuous player on the field, but only by the kind of baseball you are playing. Through channeling his aggressive performance, Robinson showed he took Rickey's encouragement to heart, then and throughout his career, paving the way for integration in baseball, earning the respect of teammates and opponents, stealing bases, stealing home, stealing the hearts of fans, and stealing history. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. Now we'll get started with our Q&A. So it's time for you to type your questions into the Q&A tab on your phones. Here's the QR code again in case you need it to get back into Slido. And make sure you include your name if you want to be eligible to win tonight's prize, okay? Enter your name and then enter your question. We're going to bring up our speakers and we'll take questions on both topics at the same time. We encourage you to draw connections between La Belle Epoque and Jackie Robinson if you can, and the prize will go to the question that draws the best connection between the two. And it's a very special prize. Again, include your name. So let's get started. Speakers, why don't you come on up, please? And for those who are not familiar, when we do draw a connection, we will gong the gong. Excellent. So welcome back, Giulia and Ray. And let's get started.
That was wonderful.
Okay, so our first question here is, which time period would be considered baseball's own Belle Epoque? Well done.
Excellent question, because there's a debate. I want to get the years right. A lot of people talk about like 1930s to up to World War II as the so-called golden era of baseball. But how could it have been golden when there wasn't integration in baseball? Now, I mean, they're great players. I mean, you get to the end of Babe Ruth's career and the beginning of Lou Gehrig, and some great players. But again, it couldn't have been fully golden if the black players in the Negro Leagues and Latino players in the Negro Leagues were not part of the same level of competition. So I think a lot of, in my opinion, then we get a period of where everyone's competing, and competing still at a very high level is much later as we get into the 50s, I think. is when that happens, because by 1959, we have so-called full integration in baseball. It takes from Robinson's appearance in 1947 until 1959 before every major league team has at least one black or Afro-Latino player on their roster. Robinson only plays 10 of those seasons, as I noted, so there's not full integration even in his lifetime. And even his appearance, as historians often note, 47 is still almost a decade before Rosa Parks decides that she doesn't want to get up off the bus. So baseball is important in that way, but as more teams get more black and Latino players, it's about 120 or so players in that period who help integrate baseball. So that's somewhat of a golden age, certainly for the sport, and those players are becoming more accepted, and yet those players still can't live in the same neighborhoods as their teammates and things like that. So just like Belle Epoque, it's complicated.
Nice one.
Excellent.
Very good.
Excellent. Great question and wonderful answer. All right, here's another fun one. If Robinson traded his Boston hat for a French top hat, would he have been allowed to steal the entrance of the Moulin Rouge? Any response to that? Or it's just we can marvel in the creativity?
Yeah, I think that one just doesn't, it just stands on its own. But I would say yes, absolutely. If he had his silk top hat and had walked through the front door of the Moulin Rouge, yes, for sure.
Well, can I ask, tell us more about, at least briefly, race issues in that period. I'm sure that's another lecture, but if you could touch on it briefly.
Well, it's interesting that there is a lot of, not so much in the time period that I'm talking about, but more in the 1920s and 30s, a lot of American artists, especially musicians, are enjoying a great deal of popularity in France, in Paris especially, where they are hugely sought after. And one of the things that they notice is that they don't face the same kind of discrimination in Paris that they do in America. And so there's this kind of sense of almost like a relief that they can just carry on with their lives and their creativity and their performances, et cetera, without having to face the same kind of discrimination that they face at home.
Excellent. Great crossover conversation there. We'll give a little gong for that. All right, here's another question from Susan. Does Robinson's subversive style of baseball equivalent to the Parisian working class pushing back against the bourgeoisie?
Great question. Yeah, I think he was aggressive because he was always an aggressive person, too. Aggressive as an athlete, aggressive personally, except maybe with his wife, Rachel, God bless her, just turned 100 years old as well. He was a very sensitive man, very religious man, suffered fools lightly, but was not afraid to fight. Going back to being a teenager in Pasadena. So that kind of just progressed on through his life and through his play. And as I noted, he was asked to tone that down for the first few years of his career. And he's a former football player, so that was kind of tough for him. But he was asked to tone that down early in his career, but after about 3 years, Branch Rickey said, okay, let him have it, and he let him have it. And but was not afraid to be outspoken, whereas a few other black players would join him, but for the most part, his teammates like Roy Campanella, who was equally as talented, he was just happy to be there, didn't want to cause waves, but Robinson is speaking before the Senate, about communism, and eventually is a major player in the civil rights movement, helping to fund the civil rights movement, and so he stands out in that way that I think probably would have I wouldn't doubt that he would have been influenced by predecessors from the French countryside, if you will, because he wasn't necessarily the most learned man, but he was someone who paid attention to poor people and the people's movements around the world.
Anything to add? Should we move on? All right, here's another good one. If
Wrap it all up.
Robinson's home plate steals could be considered a kind of anarchist expression of dissent and uniqueness, who was the Robinson of La Belle Epoque? This is from Nancy. Well done.
Nice one.
Who was the Robinson of La Belle Epoque?
So actually, I think to some extent you could argue that Toulouse-Lautrec is up there. He came from an aristocratic background, so technically he came from a milieu that was not, from which he was not expected to move in the kinds of circles that he ultimately chose to move and live in. At the same time, there's another artist, in this case actually a playwright and performer by the name of Alfred Jarry, Jarry. And Jarry, who we didn't get a chance to talk about right now, is a really fascinating character. Also, like Toulouse-Lautrec, absolutely destroyed himself with alcohol, but was he was a sort of Jackie Robinson of drama. He wrote very, let's say, avant-garde and how do you say, like a
Subversive?
Yes, subversive and paradigm shifting work called King Ubu, loosely based on Shakespeare's Macbeth and very much a parody and a satire of bourgeois society. Very, very scathing. The very first word of his play was merdre, which is kind of a sort of, little bit of a variation on the French word merde for shit. And and this started a huge, commotion, and there was a riot broke out on the first night of King Ubu production, and blah, blah, blah. And Jarry is considered to be sort of the great-grandfather, if you will, of both surrealism and the theater of the absurd. So, yeah, definitely.
Great answer. Great question. Thank you. Okay, this is a question from Wendy, who asks, like Robinson's excellence being a unique expression of dissent as a black man, could one say the same about Toulouse-Lautrec as a differently abled man? It's sort of a continuation of what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a very good, observation, for sure. Toulouse-Lautrec, as I mentioned before, came from a very, very privileged background. He was also disabled. He had a degenerative bone disease, and he was, like I say, unfortunately plagued by alcoholism and severe depression. But he had a unique vision, and so I think in that respect, you can see there's a similar kind of spirit almost in what he was doing. Toulouse-Lautrec, despite his background, I mentioned briefly, actually lived in brothels and was a resident of Montmartre, which was the hill on which the Commune was born. So it was a working class neighborhood, and he was a great champion of the people that he lived with, especially the prostitutes who were his friends. Many of them were his friends. And so he was certainly a champion of those who were oppressed, and I think that's why his art looks the way it does, because he's trying to call attention to the sort of ridiculous excesses and absurdity of these privileged classes, at the same time that he's also kind of sort of putting them under a microscope.
This is a question sort of building on Ray's question about race in La Belle Epoque. It's an anonymous question, and I'm going to correct what I think was an autocorrect. Were there prominent artists of color who made important or less documented contributions to the art or fashion of La Belle Epoque?
So there was a important performer. He was a clown by the name of Chocolat. That was his nickname, of course. And he was the foil to another clown by the name of Fouti, and the two of them were a team, and they were hugely popular, hugely popular. And one of the things that is, difficult to read and to hear about, et cetera, and to learn about is that the character of Chocolat was always the foil to Fouty. So Fouty was the, very clever and sort of bossy and abusive figure in the act, and Chocolat was the one who was bearing the brunt. And this is something that I think is also, it's not exactly the same, but it's somewhat related to the role that Josephine Baker plays later on in the 1920s and early 30s in France, where she is a dancer, for those of us who are not familiar with her, who becomes extraordinarily powerful in terms of the recognition that she has in French society. She lives her life in France, etc. She's very, very wealthy and so on. But at the same time, she also kind of embodies this sort of stereotypical idea about the black woman dancer and the black female body that is something that we are still, dealing with today. And that's one of the reasons why, as I was saying before to Ray, I find the Belle Epoque so interesting, because a lot of the issues that we, live with today in our society are very visible there too.
This is from Amanda. Were the women from the Moulin Rouge treated similarly to Jackie Robinson in society, special talents but not treated equally? Good
Nice
question,
one.
Amanda.
They were certainly special talents. They were definitely not treated equally. Many of them died in abject poverty. Some of them died, again, at the hands of the absinthe that they consumed in great quantities. And they were seen as both these sort of objects of erotic fascination and titillation. And so they were reduced in a way to the stereotypical ideas about their sexuality and their gender, at the same time that they defiantly danced. And sometimes, for example, in the case of Yvette Gilbert, the singer with the black gloves, she sang very, very caustic and angry songs about the realities of being a Montmartre woman in Paris in the Belle Epoque. It wasn't a pretty picture, despite the fact that they were so popular.
Here's a question from Zach L. How would our perception of Jackie Robinson's career and La Belle Epoque be different without the specific audience they had in their time? What role does the audience have in the way we understand them and their achievements?
Interesting. Because, wow, it was a diverse audience, obviously. It was an audience of the majority that didn't really know what to expect, or had all these misconceptions of what to expect when he first appears. You might say they were threatened, you might say they were just confused, or not understanding what was going on in terms of, well, what does this mean, black and white working together and things like that. And then the other audience that felt like he was messianic in some respects. Finally, here's an opportunity. And just the weight of the world of 12 million black people on his shoulders, or at least it seemed that way. And I think maybe at times he may have felt that when all he really wanted to do was just play baseball, which ironically, as a sport for him, was still fairly new. He'd played it all his life, but it was his worst sport. He was better at football, he was better at basketball, he was better at tennis, he was better at golf. he was a track and field star. His brother was an Olympian. He broke all his brother's high school records. He was good looking. You hated him. The only thing he couldn't do was swim. And that's another lecture that you'll have to invite me back for. Which is actually quite an interesting story. But so he had all those audiences, and then of course the immediate audiences of his teammates, just one trying to prove himself as a ball player, and two trying to navigate this white world that he had some experience with at UCLA and football and all of that, and in the military, which he hated. So he didn't always have great white examples to go after, and that's why Branch Rickey was so important to him. But in the end, he wanted to be his own man and figure out how to play this game, and to some degree, damn the audience. You know, I got to do what I got to do, and I'm going to speak my truth about what I need to speak about. And that sometimes put him crossways with all the audiences. But he was, he had the upbringing from his mother and the stability of his faith to stand for what he felt was right. And I think, especially after baseball, is where it really shows in his political activities. Although they were friendly, he was always at heads with Malcolm X. He was a bigger supporter of Martin Luther King. He was politically Republican, initially backing Nixon and then switching to Kennedy. So he seemed to go against the grain a lot, but he stood by his principles. And in that regard, he's a great example of manhood for all of us.
You want to speak to the audience, how the audience shaped the work in the Belle Epoque?
Wow, that's a really good question. So I guess the thing that I would say is that there's this myth that the artist is just a kind of chronicler of the time that they live in, whereas the truth is that the artist is also building and creating the time that they live in. So there's this kind of idea that, you know, there's mainstream bourgeois or working class or whatever, in the case of Belle Epoque France, you know, society, and then there are the artists over here doing these weird things. But the fact is that both groups need each other. The society needs the avant-garde artists to be able to point the finger and say, oh, look at those horrible artists doing these horrible things and so scandalous, et cetera, so that they can feel better. At the same time that the artist needs the bourgeois society that they're critiquing because they need the subject matter at the same time that they also need to make the money by selling the work about the society. So it's complicated.
It's complicated.
I think that's the motto of the evening. Yeah, it's complicated.
It's complicated. Mixed taste. It's complicated. That's right. All right, last question of the night from Mel. What is the more athletic feat, stealing home or lifting your leg like that? And which is the more effective political statement?
That's a good one.
Steal home only if you can.
Bravo!
All right, that's a perfect place to stop. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Giulia. It's been a pleasure having you both here.
That was brilliant.
And now it's prize time. Each week, we give a prize for the person who makes the best connection. And this week, our production manager, Mike Zabrinik, has been listening to all the questions. He chose his favorite, and he's going to tell us who it is. And the winner of tonight's prize will receive 2 free tickets to a test audience performance of Theater of the Mind, the new big immersive show that we are producing, Denver Off Center at the DCPA is producing, co-created by David Byrne and Mala Gonker. A test audience will be the first to see it before the general public in just a couple of weeks. So this is going to be a cool prize, And the winner of the prize is Wendy, who asked, like Robinson's excellence being a unique expression of dissent, as a black man, one could say, what could one say the same about Toulouse-Lautrec as a differently abled man? Congratulations, Wendy. Please email programs@mcadenver.org or come find me after the show tonight and we'll get you your prize. And now I'm thrilled to invite Mahogany back to the stage to enlighten us with an original poem inspired by tonight's talks. Kenya Mahogany Fashaw is a spoken word artist, educator, actress, producer, and singer. Mahogany.
All right, so I just want to say what an honor it is to be back at Mixed Taste for the third time. This is amazing, so thank you so much. To the presenters, Raymond and Giulia, thank you so much for enlightening us. That was so awesome, so dope. Didn't know too much beforehand, so thank you so much for giving that education. So this piece just kind of came up with something. Hope you guys enjoy it. I entitled this piece, Chaos and Peace. Summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Ignorance is bliss, especially when sheltered with privilege and power. Its peace and prosperity has no opinion on the weight of injustice, but who cares? It's the good old days, the beautiful age, the artistic expression of la Belle Epoque phase. Oh, what a beautiful time to be alive, depending on your race. So take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, where all the people and balls are white, and there is not any black folk in sight. Approaching first base, we have Jackie Robinson. Wait a minute, a Negro. Whoa, 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 whoa. This game was designed for white men in their pastime, not for this Sambo. But people like Picasso, the abstraction of art, music, and theater overshadowed the shadows of disquieting realities. Golden age turned darkest days. They never ran their course. The Belle Epoque was an era of peace and plenty between wars. A global phenomenon like becoming the first African-American player to play in the major league. Take heed to greatness that proceeds, simultaneously dressed in the best fashion, dancing in dance halls and dugouts, classism hats to hide your status, Moulin Rouge perfectly defined as a palace, while stealing women's home base, a black baseball player's While still in women's home base, a black baseball player wasn't seen as remarkable, but a callous. Chaos and peace, beautiful and unique, fighting battles of hate, all while basking in mystique. We turn our sorrows into triumphs, no matter how this life trumps us. And when we're done, for when we find ourselves struck out, finding our triumphs is how we get our home runs. For it's root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's one strike, you're out in this new golden age. Play ball. Thank you.
Mahogany. Well done. Thank you to Mahogany for wrapping it up so brilliantly. Thank you to Giulia and Ray. Thanks to you, our audience, for being here tonight. We hope to see you next week for Cowboys and the Overview Effect. Good night. Thank you.